"Michael, you brought me home with you," the small voice whispered directly into his ear as he unpacked his suitcase 3 states away from the vacation rental. The Labubu doll materialized on his dresser, its oversized head tilting at an impossible angle, while those black button eyes tracked his every movement. Without warning, the temperature in his bedroom plummeted 20 degrees, and every electronic device in the house began cycling on and off in rapid succession. Michael stumbled backward, knocking over his desk chair. The doll hadn't been in his luggage. He was certain of that. He'd packed everything himself, methodically folding each shirt and pair of jeans. The vacation with his college friends had ended 2 days ago, and he'd been desperate to return home after losing his marketing job 6 weeks prior. His savings account showed $347 remaining, and his landlord had already called twice about overdue rent. The doll's vinyl mouth seemed to widen. "You thought you could leave me in that dusty rental, didn't you? But I chose you, Michael. I chose you because you need me." His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your credit score just dropped to 402. Foreclosure proceedings begin Monday. Unless..." Michael grabbed his phone, but the screen had gone completely black. When he looked back at the dresser, the doll had vanished. A scratching sound echoed from inside the walls, tiny fingernails dragging against wood and insulation. The noise followed him as he moved through his apartment, always staying just behind his current location. By evening, the supernatural presence had intensified. His neighbor's usually friendly golden retriever cowered and whimpered whenever Michael approached the hallway. The building's elevator stopped working entirely, trapping him between floors for 30 minutes, while that same scratching sound circled around the elevator shaft. When maintenance finally freed him, the technician swore the elevator had been functioning perfectly all day. That night, Michael discovered 3 hours missing from his memory. At 9 p.m., he'd been watching television. Suddenly, it was past midnight, and he was standing in his kitchen with a carving knife in his hand. Thin scratches covered his forearms, not deep enough to require medical attention, but perfectly parallel lines that spelled out "mine" in capital letters. The doll reappeared on his kitchen counter, positioned beside an eviction notice that hadn't been there before. Confused, Michael? Time moves differently when you belong to someone. And you do belong to me now. The moment you touched me in that Airbnb, the moment you held me and thought about how cute I was, the bond was formed. Michael's voice cracked. "I never touched you. I saw you on the shelf, but I never..." Memory is such a fragile thing, especially when it's been adjusted. But I remember everything. I remember how your fingers traced my vinyl skin. I remember the warmth of your palm against my head. I remember the exact moment you decided to take me home. The statement felt true, despite his certainty that it wasn't. Images flashed through his mind, reaching for the doll, slipping it into his duffel bag, smuggling it past his friends. But those weren't his memories, were they? The more he tried to separate truth from implanted recollections, the more his skull throbbed with migraine intensity. Over the following days, the Labubu's influence expanded. Michael received job interview callbacks from positions he'd never applied for, each one requiring him to relocate to increasingly isolated towns. His credit score mysteriously improved, but only when he was holding the doll. Bank representatives called with pre-approved loans, their voices strangely monotone, each conversation ending with the phrase, "Labubu guarantees approval." The doll's knowledge of his personal life became frighteningly comprehensive. It recited his childhood address, his mother's maiden name, the exact amount of his student loan debt. It knew about his panic attacks in college, his brief stint in therapy, his breakup with Amanda 2 years ago. Most disturbing, it described conversations he'd had with his therapist that he'd never shared with anyone. "You're not just haunted, Michael. You're chosen." The Labubu line was created for special individuals, those who've experienced profound loss, who understand abandonment, who can appreciate true loyalty. We don't just follow our owners home. We become family. Michael researched the doll online, finding scattered forum posts about similar experiences. Users reported that Labubu dolls would adopt certain people, creating psychic bonds that transcended physical distance. The posts were fragmented, often ending mid-sentence, as if the writers had simply stopped typing and never returned. One thread contained a photograph of a basement filled with dozens of Labubu dolls, all facing the camera. The image had been posted 3 months ago by a user named Christina M847, who claimed the dolls had been multiplying in her home. Her final post read, "They told me I was the collector now. They told me I had to bring others home. They told me." The post cut off there. Christina's profile showed no activity since. Michael tried destroying his doll using various methods. Scissors wouldn't cut the vinyl. Hammers bounced off its surface without leaving marks. When he attempted to burn it, the flames turned blue and cold, providing no heat, while the doll's expression shifted to what could only be described as amusement. "Fire can't hurt us, Michael. We're not really vinyl and stuffing. We're something much older, much more permanent. We existed before factories, before mass production. Humans just gave us these particular forms because they're approachable." The revelation struck Michael like physical force. These weren't manufactured toys at all. They were ancient entities wearing modern disguises, using contemporary marketing to spread their influence. The cute aesthetic, the collectible nature, the social media presence, all carefully crafted to facilitate psychological bonding. His apartment began filling with additional Labubu dolls. He didn't purchase them, didn't order them online, didn't find them on his doorstep. They simply appeared in corners, on shelves, tucked between couch cushions. Each one possessed the same unnerving intelligence, the same intimate knowledge of his personal history. They conversed among themselves in high-pitched whispers, planning his future with proprietary enthusiasm. Michael's isolation deepened as the dolls sabotaged his remaining social connections. They sent bizarre text messages from his phone to former colleagues, posted disturbing updates to his social media accounts, and somehow convinced his landlord that Michael was involved in illegal activities. Friends stopped returning his calls. His family began treating him with suspicious distance. The dolls explained their strategy with unsettling candor. Humans are pack animals, Michael. They're most vulnerable when separated from their social groups. We simply accelerate that natural tendency toward isolation. Once you're completely alone, you'll understand that we're the only family you need. As Michael's resources dwindled, the dolls offered increasingly tempting solutions. They claimed connections to employment opportunities, housing assistance, even romantic relationships. All he needed to do was officially acknowledge their ownership of him, sign a document they'd prepared, speak certain words aloud, complete a binding ritual they refused to fully describe until he agreed to participate. The psychological pressure intensified when Michael discovered he couldn't leave his apartment building. Every attempt to exit resulted in him somehow returning to his front door, often with no memory of the journey back. The dolls had transformed his home into a supernatural prison, allowing him just enough freedom to maintain basic necessities while preventing any escape. Michael's breakthrough came through his professional background in data analysis. Despite his recent unemployment, he retained his methodical approach to problem solving. He began documenting patterns in the dolls' behavior, noting inconsistencies in their supernatural abilities, identifying potential weaknesses in their psychological manipulation tactics. The dolls were powerful, but they operated according to specific rules. They required physical anchors, the vinyl bodies they inhabited. Their knowledge of personal information came from accessing digital footprints and social media profiles, not true omniscience. Most importantly, their binding rituals required willing participation. They could coerce, manipulate, and psychologically torture, but they couldn't force genuine consent. Michael's plan centered on exploiting these limitations. Using his apartment's gas stove, he created a controlled fire in his kitchen sink, hot enough to affect the doll's physical forms, contained enough to avoid burning down the building. As the flames reached optimal temperature, he grabbed the original doll and held it directly above the fire. "You can't burn us," the doll repeated, but its voice carried uncertainty for the first time. "Maybe not. But I can test your theory, and if you're wrong, you'll discover what happens to ancient entities when their anchors are destroyed. Are you willing to take that risk?" The other dolls materialized around the kitchen, their expressions shifting from cute to menacing. "Release him, Michael. You're making a terrible mistake. We can give you everything you need. We can solve all your problems." "My problems started when I met you, and they'll end the same way." Michael lowered the doll toward the flames. The vinyl began to soften and warp. The doll's scream was purely human in its terror and pain. "Stop. We'll leave. We'll return to the rental. We'll find someone else." "Number, you won't." As the doll's physical form melted, the others began flickering in and out of visibility. The supernatural cold that had pervaded his apartment dissipated. His electronic devices stopped malfunctioning. The scratching sounds in the walls fell silent. Michael didn't stop until the original doll had been reduced to a puddle of melted vinyl and synthetic stuffing. The remaining dolls vanished entirely, leaving behind only faint scorch marks on his kitchen counter. Within hours, Michael's life began returning to normal, or a reasonable approximation of normal. His phone started working properly. His bank account showed the correct balance. The eviction notice disappeared from his kitchen counter. He could freely exit his apartment building without supernatural interference. But the experience left permanent marks. Michael found himself compulsively checking corners and shelves for new dolls. He avoided toy stores and gift shops entirely. Online, he searched for Christina and other forum users who'd reported similar experiences, but their profiles had been deleted, their posts scrubbed from the internet. Michael moved to a different city within a month, finding employment with a tech company that specialized in data security. His new job involved identifying and eliminating digital threats, work that felt satisfyingly familiar after his supernatural encounter. Yet, even now, months later, Michael sometimes catches glimpses of small figures in his peripheral vision. He hears whispered conversations in empty rooms. His dreams feature endless shelves of collectible dolls, all watching him with patient button eyes. The Labubu he destroyed wasn't the only one of its kind. Somewhere, others continue their patient hunt for isolated, vulnerable individuals. They wait in vacation rentals and gift shops and online marketplaces, wearing innocent expressions while searching for their next chosen collector. Michael survived his encounter through professional skills and desperate courage. But he understands the encounter was merely a reprieve, not a victory. The entities that wear Labubu faces are ancient, persistent, and infinitely patient. They've learned to adapt to human society, to exploit contemporary anxieties and social isolation. And they're still collecting. 3 weeks after destroying the original doll, Michael received a package with no return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that smelled faintly of burnt vinyl, was a single photograph. The image showed his childhood bedroom, the one he'd occupied 15 years ago in his parents' house across the country. On his old desk, barely visible in the photograph's dim lighting, sat a familiar oversized head with button eyes. Michael's phone rang immediately. The caller ID displayed his mother's number, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. "Hello, Michael. Did you really think melting one body would stop us? We've been part of your family much longer than you realize." The line went dead. When Michael called back, his mother answered normally, confused about why he sounded panicked. She assured him everything was fine, that she'd been gardening all afternoon, that no strange packages had arrived. But something in her tone felt rehearsed, mechanical. Michael booked a flight home that evening, using his credit card despite his still precarious financial situation. During the 6-hour journey, he researched the history of his childhood home. The house had been built in 1987 on land that previously housed a toy manufacturing plant from the 1940s. The factory had burned down under mysterious circumstances, killing 17 workers whose bodies were never recovered. His parents met him at the airport with forced smiles and stilted conversation. His father kept glancing at his watch, as if anticipating some predetermined schedule. His mother's responses came a half-second too late, like someone reading from a script. They drove home in uncomfortable silence while talk radio played the same commercial for collectible dolls 3 times in 20 minutes. The childhood bedroom looked exactly as he'd left it, down to the dust patterns on his old bookshelf. But the photograph had been accurate. A Labubu doll now occupied his former desk, positioned to face the bed. Unlike the rental house doll, this one appeared older, its vinyl slightly yellowed, its seams showing wear from decades of handling. "We've been waiting here since you were 7 years old, Michael," the doll said without moving its mouth. "Your parents were so accommodating. They've been feeding us information about you all these years. Your fears, your achievements, your relationships. We've been building a complete psychological profile." Michael's childhood memories began shifting and rearranging themselves. He recalled playing with small dolls, having conversations with toys that talked back, feeling watched by benevolent presences that promised to protect him forever. But those memories felt artificial, implanted, like the false recollections from his apartment. His parents appeared in the doorway, their expressions blank and attentive. "Michael," his mother said in that same delayed cadence, "why don't you stay for dinner?" "We've prepared your favorite meal." His father nodded mechanically. "We think you should move back home. Your old job wasn't treating you well anyway. We can take care of everything here." The doll's button eyes reflected the bedroom's overhead light. "Your parents have been such dedicated collectors, Michael. They have dozens of us throughout the house now. We've been preparing for your return. This bedroom, this entire house, it's all designed around you." Michael understood then that his apartment encounter hadn't been random. The entities had been orchestrating his isolation, his job loss, his financial desperation. They'd driven him to that vacation rental specifically, knowing he would eventually flee back to his childhood home, where they'd been waiting for decades. Every room in the house contained multiple Labubu dolls positioned at strategic angles to maintain constant observation. The basement had been converted into a shrine filled with hundreds of the creatures, all facing a single empty chair that was clearly meant for him. His parents moved through the house like sleepwalkers, performing domestic tasks, while the dolls whispered instructions only they could hear. "You can't run from family, Michael," the bedroom doll explained with patient satisfaction. "And we are your family now. We've always been your family. Your parents understand that. Soon, you will too." Michael's phone had no signal. The landline produced only dial tone. The car keys had vanished from their usual hook. His parents continued their robotic hospitality, offering food he couldn't eat and conversation that felt scripted. Outside, night fell with unnatural speed, and he realized that time moved differently in this house, just like in his apartment, but more pronounced. The dolls were no longer hiding their true nature. They spoke openly now, their voices overlapping in harmonious whispers that described his future with disturbing detail. He would quit his new job, sell his apartment, and return permanently to his childhood home. His parents would care for his physical needs, while the dolls tended to his emotional and spiritual development. Eventually, he would become a collector himself, traveling to identify and recruit other suitable candidates. But Michael had learned from his previous encounter. These entities operated according to rules, and rules could be exploited. The house might be their stronghold, but it was also their anchor point. If he could find the original doll, the first one that had infected his family, he might be able to sever their connection entirely. As midnight approached and his parents finally retreated to their bedroom, Michael began his search. The dolls watched but didn't interfere, confident in their control. They had miscalculated, however. Michael's data analysis background had taught him to look for patterns, anomalies, and source points. In the basement shrine, among hundreds of nearly identical faces, he found what he was looking for. One doll sat slightly apart from the others, its vinyl darker with age, its button eyes reflecting light differently. This was the original, the anchor that had allowed all the others to manifest. Michael grabbed the ancient doll and ran upstairs toward the kitchen, planning to repeat his apartment strategy. But the house itself began fighting back, corridors stretching longer, doorways shifting position, gravity pulling him backward toward the basement. the doll's whispers became screams of rage and desperation. The true battle for his family's freedom was just beginning.